yes, we have our speaker here with us. So let me introduce the speaker, Professor of Second Language Acquisition at Lancaster University here in the UK, known for her work on dyslexia and other specific learning differences, and a lead educator for dyslexia and foreign language learning MOOC at FutureLearn. Welcome, Judit Kormos. Welcome to our conference. Judit contributed to a number of studies on the accessibility of language tests to young learners, and she has been conducting workshops on inclusive language teaching globally all over the world. And today, Judit will be talking to us about digital inclusion in the language classroom. So without much further ado, Judit, over to you.
Hi, hello everyone. A warm welcome to this session and talk on digital inclusion in the language classroom. My name is Judit Kormos, and as you have heard, my expertise is primarily in teaching students who are neurodiverse and who learn additional languages, and I also do a lot of work on inclusive language teacher education. And keeping with the theme of the future, I think we'll need to consider aspects of digital inclusion more globally and widely, and also digital inclusion from the perspective of language learners who might have disabilities. So when I started preparing for this talk, I did what I think sometimes my students do, and I turned to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT what I should do if I want to give a lecture on digital inclusion in the language classroom. And not because I didn't know what I wanted to talk about, but I was interested in what this modern artificial intelligence-driven tool would suggest. And it came up with an outline for a possible talk, suggesting that I start with an introduction, and then I talk about understanding digital inclusion, and so on. And in the introduction, it said, begin with a captivating quote or anecdote related to the importance of digital inclusion in education, right? And then I said, okay, good. Can you give me a captivating quote about digital inclusion? And then, as you see, the quote, just went away. I just want to hide all right, I just want to move the video so that I can see the quote. All right, and so the quote it gave me was that digital inclusion isn't just about connecting people to technology, it's about connecting people to each other, to knowledge, and to a world of endless possibilities. And I actually really like this quote. And I said, being an academic and a researcher, I asked, who said this? And then ChatGPT answered, apologize for any confusion, but the quote I provided earlier is an original creation by me to illustrate the concept of digital inclusion, and it's not attributed to a specific individual. And if you're looking for quotes from notable figures, here is one related to digital inclusion. So here's a real one. Access to computers and the internet has become a basic need for education in our society. To be honest with you, I much prefer the quote that ChatGPT provided, but it's again something that I talk about to my students, is that you have to be careful with artificial intelligence because it might make up things that nobody actually said. So you have to be critical with the information, right? So that was the captivating quote, and hopefully combined with an anecdote. related to the importance of digital inclusion in education. And don't worry, the rest of my talk is not AI generated. So hopefully I will give you some human insights into digital inclusion, right? Now, when you think about digital inclusion, what terms, what words, what phrases do come to your mind? And I will just give you a minute to take the QR code, and I will start presenting in Mentimeter, and you can still think about it in the meantime. So what are these terms, keywords that you're thinking about when it comes to digital inclusion? And I will stop sharing for a moment, and I will put the quote in the chat, and I will just start my Mentimeter in a moment, right? So I just put also the link for you if you need it, just to be digitally inclusive. But if you prefer the analog version or an alternative version to this task, then I also put the question in the chat box. And then in a moment, I'm just going to present the Mentimeter tasks so that you can start putting in your thoughts, and hopefully we'll get a word cloud. So I can see some responses already. Wonderful. Right, so it looks like some of the key terms are accessibility, equity, empowerment, and you already mentioned some of the barriers like lack of skills, fairness. Right, I'll just wait a little bit so that you have a chance. Growth, convenience, progress, possibilities. Practicality. All right, I'll wait a little bit until I go on to the next one. Right. Okay, so good assistant, lack of skills, computers, progress, forward thinking, efficiency, visibility, and so on. Ethicality, these are really user friendliness. These are really important terms, right? Okay, good. Now, what barriers did you face when responding to the previous question? Right, so I mean, we have 200 participants here, and I was wondering what were the barriers to you? Did you respond? Right, so some of you lacked the knowledge of the subject matter. You didn't know too much about digital inclusion. Inability to spell, clarity of the terms, right? Perception, no, right? I mean, the question is really kind of was related also to the tool itself. Maybe your internet speed, maybe you're not really understanding exactly what you were supposed to be doing, getting online with your phone, couldn't access the QR code fast enough. Internet problems, right? So there were quite a few issues here, or they might have been quite a few issues depending on where you are, and also because it's a plenary session, so I didn't have a lot of time to wait for everybody to join. Maybe this was the first time you have used Mentimeter. It took you time to find your ways, right? And then one more question. How could we remove these barriers, right? And I already have some responses here from a previous presentation, but maybe you can add some more. right? More practice in the future, training, preparation tool, digital awareness, more training. It looks like training is really important, scaffolding, acknowledging that these barriers exist and addressing them, tutorials, faster internet, some government support, introducing computers and software in the classroom, etc. Right? Technological knowledge. Yeah, and you said I provided options to access. And in a classroom, obviously, for example, I would allow students to write down the answers on paper, perhaps, right? Okay, good. So let us see what exactly digital inclusion then is, right? Because you mentioned that you had some difficulties with the term, right? So the overview of this presentation, we're going to discuss inclusion in education, digital inclusion. We'll define it, and we'll think about barriers that can come in the way of digital inclusion. We'll discuss principles of universal design, accessibility considerations in digital technology, how to support students with disabilities using digital technology, and hopefully there will be a conclusion with some takeaway message for you at the end of this talk, right? So what is inclusion? Inclusion is increasing the participation of students in and reducing their exclusion from the cultures, curricula, and communities of local schools. It also means that we need to restructure the cultures, policies, and practices in schools so that they respond to the diversity of students in the locality, right? So this is general inclusion when we talk about a group of students who come to our schools, to our institutional educations. And sometimes if we provide online education, then the locality is actually global, right? Reducing barriers to learning and increasing participation for all students, not only those with impairments or those who are categorized as having special educational needs. So what is really important about inclusive education is that it's not just about students who have disabilities or some kind of additional needs. It's about everybody. And when we try to reduce these barriers, we also need to learn from our attempts to overcome these barriers to access and participation so that we can make changes that benefit the students more widely. And then we need to view the difference between the students as resources to support learning rather than problems to be overcome. And I think this is really important so that we change our attitudes to inclusion and we don't see it as an issue or a problem anymore, but something that we can exploit and use to support all learners, right? Now, what is digital inclusion? According to the European Commission, digital inclusion enables all people to contribute to and benefit from the digital economy and society. And this means working on different aspects, for example, access to information technology, ensuring infrastructure, affordable prices, and ease of use. And again, when you reflected on how you could access, for example, a software or an app like Mentimeter or the task with it, you already mentioned access. It was at the center of the word cloud even, right? An internet connection. Digital inclusion also includes working with assistive technologies that facilitate access for people with disabilities who would not otherwise be able to use them. This digital inclusion also includes aspects of digital literacy, including ICT training in basic education and lifelong learning for individuals. And again, this was mentioned in your word clouds and in your reflections at the beginning of the talk, that you need training on how to use Mentimeter, training on how to interact with tasks. And this training needs to be ongoing. I mean, I myself, I'm constantly learning about new technological tools to be able to use them in my teaching, in my research, but also in our everyday life, right? And then finally, social inclusion, focusing on the most disadvantaged sectors of society with specific programs that help them enter the digital world, right? Not everybody from all the different social contexts has access to these technologies or has the digital literacy to benefit from this digital revolution that we are in at the moment, right? So, and also digital inclusion, just as any other aspect of inclusion, is evolving. It's a process, it's never an end state. So we have to think about digital inclusion changing and transforming and evolving as technology advances, right? But there are obstacles for digital inclusion, and this is what I also asked you about at the beginning of my talk. And some of these include lack of skills, lack of confidence, right? I mean, there are actually people who can use smartphones for different purposes, but they believe that they can't, they don't have the self-confidence to use them. And this is again really important, because the ability to believe that you can succeed in doing something is a very important precursor to actual action. Lack of motivation. Again, not everybody is motivated or is driven to learn new technology or is supported in developing motivation to keep up with digital technology. And then there are inbuilt issues for digital inclusion in the digital world itself, that there are tools which are not properly designed. And these poor design features exclude a lot of people, those with disabilities, but also others who may not be able to figure out how a particular design works, right? And we also need to think about the digital divide that divides our society, our students, our learners. And one of them is the access divide. Not everybody has access to these digital technologies. I mean, not everybody has a smartphone, not everybody has stable and fast internet connection. The use divide. Even if you do have access, you may not know how to use the technology. And even if you have access and know how to use technology, maybe you don't know how to use it well or how to use it efficiently. And that's the quality of use gap. The digital divide is also is also made worse by socioeconomic factors, and digital literacy can mediate the digital divide, because if you lack digital literacy, again, you might be left behind. And then people with disabilities are also very often left at the bottom of this divide. They are always, when tools are designed, they are often at the bottom list of the designers of who should be considered as users. So I think this is really important to think about also in our educational context, right? What are the benefits of digital inclusion for our learners when it comes to language learning in particular? Is access to authentic materials, right? I mean, the internet is full of videos, authentic songs, articles to read, films, etc. That, you know, when I was a language learner, I didn't have access to such a wealth of materials. And if you live in a country where access to, for example, English in spoken interaction is limited, you can have access to a lot of authentic materials on the World Wide Web. Now, with the modern digital technology, interaction with digital tools is not one way. there is real interaction, and this is also developing with artificial intelligence. So it's not just you consume the material that is out there on the internet, but you can interact with it. You can produce a text, you can get it corrected, you can speak to a chatbot, and then you can get a response, right? It also allows you to collaborate widely with people outside your country or outside your town, etc. It can offer personalized learning through computer adaptive technology that adjusts to the student's needs. If you are weaker in one area, maybe you get more practice opportunities. If you are stronger, then you can proceed quicker, for example. There is assistive technology. So if you think about language learners who are visually impaired, technology has just transformed their lives enormously because of all the assistive devices that are available for them. Even though we tend to think of digital tools as distractions, in our lives, they can also serve to increase inattention, focus, and production. They can help us focus and produce more output, more written text, etc., if used properly, obviously. And it can also give us control and ownership over the learning process, because we can choose the digital tools that we want to work with and how long we want to work with and what aspects of our language competence we want to develop, right? And then it can give us independence and self-mastery in performing some learning tasks, right? So these are some of the benefits of digital inclusion, particularly for language learners. And when it comes to digital inclusion objectives, particularly in the European Union, where I work in the UK, but I also have worked in different European projects. So I really find it important to stress that these objectives are such as accessibility, affordability, development of digital skills, and relevant content and services are key to what also the UN calls for the roadmap for digital cooperation, right? Now, moving closely to designing and using digital tools, there are guidelines available that regulate and provide tools and instruments to make digital apps and content accessible. And they have kind of 4 basic principles. The first one is that accessible digital tools should be perceivable. So the user should be able to identify the content and the interface elements by means of the senses, right? So through hearing, through viewing, or simultaneously through hearing and viewing. They should be operable. In other ways, the user should be able to successfully use controls, buttons, navigation, and other interactive elements. It should be understandable, so the user should be able to comprehend the content, learn and remember how to use these tools. And they should be robust, so that the content is robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of users, allowing them to choose the technology they use to interact with the tool and the site, right? And again, when you choose digital tools for your teaching, please do consider these principles, that the tools that you choose should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? Now, when it comes to education in general, a very important principle that governs inclusion in education, but also inclusion in any educational material, is universal design. Universal design traditionally comes from architecture, and it is a principle that offers students a fair and equitable means to access education, regardless of their characteristics or strengths and weaknesses. Universal design has 3 main principles. The first one is providing multiple means of representation, right? And then if you already remember what I said earlier about digital inclusion, that it says that you should provide options for perception, that is how to see, how to hear, how to view at the same time, providing options for language, so when students can hear and see things at the same time in different languages, providing options for comprehension, supporting students to understand what is being read, what is being listened to through various tools. Providing multiple means of action and expression. So multiple means of representation were about how you present learning material. Multiple means of action and expression are what the students do with the learning material. And we need to provide student options for physical action, right? So if you think back, when I said, we're going to use the Mentimeter, there were different ways of accessing it. And if we were in a real classroom, I could say, oh, if you don't want to use your phone, you can write it down, or you can say to your partner, providing option for expression and communication, using different ways of expressing yourself, for example, in a blog post or maybe a voice message, providing options for executive functions, is options for goal setting, regulating your goals, setting targets for yourself in language learning. And providing multiple means of engagement is basically making sure that our students are engaged in the language learning activity or in the educational activity in general. And it should mean that we provide options for interests, catering for students' different areas of interest, providing options for sustaining effort and persistence, so helping students monitor their own learning processes, and providing options for self-regulation, supporting students how they learn, right? So these are very general educational principles that refer to inclusion, but they can also refer to digital inclusion. And if you remember when I talked about the benefits of digital inclusion, it included self-regulation and so on. So what are some of the features that we need to consider when we design a language learning task? Providing options for perception. For example, offering ways of customizing the display of information. So how do we display information? Can we do it in multiple ways? Offering alternatives for auditory information, so you can also see what is being said. Offering alternatives for visual information, hearing and seeing at the same time, so that if you have students with impairments in one area, they can use it. Providing options for language, pre-teaching vocabulary, clarifying syntax and structure of the task genre, illustrating through multiple media what it is that we want to teach in terms of the language. Providing options for comprehension, supporting students with background knowledge, guiding information processing through visualization and manipulation, right? And then providing options for physical action, varying the methods for response in a digital environment, hopefully varying modes of navigation, and optimizing access to tools and assistive technologies, right? So what are the considerations that we can put in place for instructional task design when we use digital technology, but also when we design any kind of task? Making sure that our instructions are clear, concise, we model what the students need to do, we present the instructions in multiple modalities, and if possible, we also visualize some of our instructions of how to use the task, how to use the tool, the app, the digital environment. A lot of the times, digital materials come with a set font type, headings, and sections. But when you choose digital tools, also think about, are these easily perceivable? Can they be changed so that students who have visual impairments or have dyslexia benefit from this font type, headings, and section, and makes it easier for them to read the material? Timing, making sure that even if you use digital technology, you allocate sufficient time for students to do the task. There should be some flexibility in the timing, so slower learners could finish within a longer period of time. Quicker learners maybe can be given additional tasks. If, for example, the task requires giving an oral presentation or sending a voice message, is there an opportunity for rehearsal? So saying what you want to say, deleting it, and then recording it again, because that helps students to produce more accurate language, to give them more confidence, and to practice until they feel they are satisfied with what they want to say or the information they want to convey. Building in support. So when you use a digital tool, think about what other tools can be used to support that. For example, for a narrated PowerPoint presentation, can the students use spell checkers and so on? What is the role of the teacher? Can you give some support to students? How can others help each other to use the technology and exploit the digital tool for language learning? When students work collaboratively in a digital environment, you often put them in groups. Here you might want to consider the students' strengths and weaknesses. So if students, for one reason or another, are stronger in, for example, oral expression, or stronger in coming up with ideas, they can be the organizers, and then someone is with closer attention to detail can be the one who writes down all the answers, etc. So you can assign different roles. You can also consider group size. So students with, for example, autism, they might prefer working in smaller groups rather than in larger groups, right? And then when you give feedback using the digital tool, you should really try to also focus on positive, encouraging feedback. And then digital tools can have inbuilt checklists, or you can create checklists. And there can be peer and automated feedback as well in a digital environment, which helps students develop their language skills, right? Just a little bit towards the end about some of the specifics that we can do to support neurodiverse students. But before we do that, let me just briefly give you a very quick overview. What are some of the characteristics of neurodiverse students that we need to consider in terms of digital inclusion as well, but in teaching in general? These students often have what we call limitations in working memory. They find it a bit challenging to remember lots of information at once and keeping lots of pieces of information in mind. They might be slower processing information. Students with dyslexia, for example, may have challenges with phonological awareness, working with sounds, distinguishing sounds. Students with, for example, dyslexia or other kind of specific learning difficulties, as well as students with ADHD, so attention-related issues, they might have some difficulties with what we call central executive functions, which is to do with partly regulating your attentional resources, but also goal setting and keeping to your goals and not getting distracted, right? And also these students can be a bit slower in general processing information, right? So in digital context, when it comes to neurodiverse students, you have to be specifically focused on clearly organized content. And again, this was part of digital inclusion already, which benefits everybody, but it is crucial for neurodiverse students. You might want to reduce visual distractions. A lot of the digital interfaces are full of illustrations, lots of distractions. If they can be minimized, that's really beneficial. Multimodal access, again, just keeping in line with universal design features. For example, providing information in oral format as well as in written format. So both are useful, but sometimes students with dyslexia might prefer hearing things rather than having to read them. Making sure that you do not convey a lot of information in one step when you give instructions, so kind of phasing your instructions, simplifying your instructions, and then be mindful also of some of the fine-grained cursor movements that are required in digital tasks for dyspraxic students, so students who have problems with fine motor skills. They may not be so skilled with moving the mouse, etc. And then, as I said earlier, flexibility in the timing of the task, again, is is crucial for neurodiverse students because they might be slower processing information, right? And then supporting for autonomous learning and maintaining task focus. Again, it takes us back to universal design, but it is very important for students who might be neurodiverse. And for students who might struggle with social communication, some of the support for social online interaction might be really beneficial because in social contexts, the visual clues, the gestures might be missing, and students might find that particularly confusing when it comes to social interaction. Supporting the digital inclusion of neurodiverse students can be done by removing content barriers in terms of instructions, task contact, removing physical barriers such as how they sit at their tables or desks and at their computers, how the keyboard is arranged, the screen, providing training in the use of digital tools. Again, getting us back to the beginning of the talk where I highlighted that training is really important, building in flexibility and autonomy and choice in how digital technology is used, and involving learners in decision making and asking their feedback on what digital tools work for them. And finally, considering their attention span, how much they can take in at a time, and when do they get tired when working with digital tools, or where their attention will actually move away from the focus of the language learning activity or the digital task, right? I have put some apps and assistive technologies on this slide. And there will be a YouTube recording available. So if you want to take a snapshot of this later, that's possible. So if you take a photo of the link, it will take you to some assistive tools that can be used to support neurodiverse students and again, support other language learners in general. And I have also collected some useful apps, some useful links here that you should feel free to again access, which are, I think, very helpful for formative assessment, but also for general language learning tasks, right? So to conclude, I think digital technology is a tool to serve pedagogical principles. Material provided, supported by digital tools, needs to be based on sound pedagogical considerations. In itself, if they are not guided by such considerations, then digital tools may not be effective or motivating at all, right? So it's not just using digital technology for technology's sake, but making sure that they are selected to serve a pedagogical purpose, right? And it's really important to consider the diverse needs of learners when using digital technology, and use technology to provide autonomy, support learning, and our aim here in general is to develop language competence. But without autonomy and proper support for learning, it is really difficult to develop students' second language competence. Access to the accessibility of the tools for students with disabilities should also be a key consideration. And when we choose digital tools, it is really important that we assess how accessible they are to people who might have disabilities, and we don't exclude these students from using these tools. You all mentioned at the beginning of the talk that we need to demonstrate how to use these digital apps and tools and train students to use technological tools. We tend to assume that our students are technologically savvy and they are the digital natives. We shouldn't necessarily assume that. They might know how to use these certain digital tools for their private lives, but not necessarily for educational purposes. We also need to monitor students' use of technology, and if they struggle, we should offer support and feedback how they can improve their use of technology. And I think it is still crucial to offer alternatives to digitally mediated tasks if, for example, the digital technology fails, or if certain students prefer working in the more traditional paper-based ways, or if they don't have access to technology at the moment because they have left their phones at home, etc. Right? So here are some more general resources on my work on specific learning difficulties in English language teaching. And some materials, teacher training materials, also our Future Learn course, which is more about language learning for students with specific learning differences, right? So thank you for your attention. And I think we have about 5 minutes for questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Judit. There was so much information there and so much food for thought. So thank you for this lovely presentation. I've been monitoring the chat and looking into the question and answer box, and we've had a bit of a discussion there around certain aspects of digital literacy. One question that has come up was around when sometimes teachers see specific tool or some piece of technology as a more of a distraction rather than something that contributes to learning. What sort of advice would you give to teachers if they feel that, oh, perhaps students are using the phones in the classroom for the wrong reason, or it's not really helping with the learning process? What sort of advice would you give to teachers on that?
Well, I mean, it's a very complex question, and it relates to using phones in the classroom, etc. So my focus is on digital educational tools, and I wouldn't necessarily like to go into that discussion, to be honest, because I think that's to do with educational policy also. And it can be very much classroom specific. So I think we should try to use digital tools for educational purposes. And anything that we find disruptive or not necessarily supporting students, learners, should be discussed with the learners, right? We should talk to them. We shouldn't necessarily assume. Sometimes some of the tools that we as teachers assume may not be supporting their learning might actually be supportive. So there should be a discussion with the students, with the teachers, with different stakeholders in this regard. But yeah, I know in the UK there is also this whole discussion about banning phones from schools, etc. And I don't really want to discuss that in detail, because that's not really
Sure.
my area
I
of
understand.
expertise.
And what about, like, if there is some teachers have commented on, like, maybe finding that some learners are anxious around the use of technology. So how would you approach this if there is a bit of kind of anxiety around the use of different tools?
Well, I would definitely, first of all, I think training, a lot of the time anxiety arises because students are not familiar with the tool. And if you give students practice to use the tool, the anxiety reduces, and also discussing the students what particularly in that digital tool makes them anxious. And for example, if there is a time pressure, like for example, there's Kahoot, which is often used by teachers, but it's a competitive tool with time pressure, etc. You have to answer really quickly. Then discuss what within this tool makes you anxious. Should we abandon using this tool altogether, or should we use it in a slightly different way, maybe getting rid of the timing feature? Yeah, basically that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And with the number of tools available, you've given some examples of apps or assisted technology or tools. There is so much to choose from. So from a teacher's perspective, where do you start? How do you know what to use, how to use it? Like, what would be the first step for someone who has not used technology a lot in the classroom?
Well, I think the first step is going on the internet and finding some useful suggestions. There is a lot of material on digital technology in the classroom. I mean, the British Council, for example, has a really useful repertoire and suggestions for digital tools for English language teaching. They have just produced a really interesting report on AI in language teaching. There are, quite a lot of blogs, teacher conferences full of presentations. Learn from your colleagues and see for yourself. Try them out. See what works for you. And also maybe ask your students, have you heard of any apps that can be used for teaching? How do you use it? I myself learn from these sources, read on the internet, conferences, ask my children, ask my students, these kinds of things. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Judith. This was very informative, lots of food for thought. And thank you for answering the questions as well, and for being part of our 9th Future of English Language Teaching conference. So we will give you a round of digital applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.